Access 2007, Simple Macros. Here we are going to talk about macros, which can be such a valuable addition to your Access applications because really you can do anything with a macro. The only limitation is your imagination. That sounds cliche, but it's very true. And once you get used to macros, which are mini programs, if you're in any other application like a SQL database, you'll feel spoiled because macros have an easy to use graphical user interface. With our macros nugget, we are going to add some conditions so that only macros will run when certain events occur. You can run macros in forms and reports. You simply tie them to various controls that exist, such as buttons or events, like when your cursor leaves a specific field. These events are items that we'll take a look at in the property sheet so you feel more comfortable with everything you can tie a macro to. Let's go ahead and jump on in to Access 2007. We're in the Zoo database. In our navigation bar here, I'll scroll down to the bottom, there are no macros. We don't even see a grouping for macros if there are none that exist. Access likes to save real estate space beyond these four main objects that you'll see. Well, how do you create a macro? First, you have to have an idea of what you want to do with it, and then you go to your Create ribbon and you simply select Macro on the far right. Here we see a grid with many different actions from which we can choose. We can add a menu, we can have just a simple beep, we can close an item, we can close a database, we can go to a specific record, we can have an hourglass appear, we can maximize a window, we can create a message box, which is what I'm going to do. But beyond that, you can open objects, you can repaint objects, you can restore them, you can run code, you can run commands, you can run another macro from a macro. Look at that, all these different items that you may want to do, even stopping a macro or stopping all your macros. So message box is what we want. We'll add some arguments. If you knew the arguments, you could type them in here, but hey, guess what? Access is going to hold your hand and help you along. What message would I like to see in my message box? How about welcome to Access 2007! Exclamation mark. Okay, that's a waste of your user's time if they have to see that dialog box, but here we're just learning. Do we want a beep? Yeah, but maybe we don't like beeps to occur. What type of message box will we display? Here we could choose critical, warning with a question mark, an exclamation mark, or just information. And you'll see there's a different icon for the different type of message box you're running. This is an informative message, and our title is going to just be welcome. You want the title to be short and sweet. I'm going to save this macro, and I'm going to call this Beginning Macros. Okay. To run it, we can click the Run button. Welcome to Access 2007. This is informative, and our title bar says Welcome. Okay, that was a simple macro. Pretty pointless, but good for the beginning. To run a macro, you can also, in the navigation area, double-click on it. There we go. Welcome to Access 2007. Okay, we are on our way. Let's create another macro. This time we'll do something more necessary. We're going to start off with the message box. I can press M and then S and it will show message box. My message this time is going to be, I'm opening a form now because we are going to open a form and we're going to tie that to a close of another form. My message is opening orders form. This may be another pointless macro. Whoops, I spelled this wrong. But I want you just to see that these actions do occur and that you can have more than one action occur at once. My type, I'll do warning just so you can see what that icon looks like, and I'll leave the title out so you can see what the difference is. So message box is one action, and my next action is going to be that I'm going to open a form. I could scroll or I can press O on my keyboard. I want to open a form. What form do I want to open? Look at this. All my forms are listed here. I'm going to open the food orders form. What view? I'd like to open it in form view, though I could throw it into design view, or if it was a report, into print preview. If I had saved a filter or a query, I could use some criteria here, or I could type my own criteria either by using the SQL where condition, or the expression builder allows me to choose various functions, or I could have a certain field equal to another field or less than a certain value, and that would prompt what's going to be displayed on the screen. My data mode by default is going to be typically what you see. I can add, I can enter, I could delete, but I could limit this if I wanted to read only, so that users would be able to see information but not make any changes. Or that they could only add information but they couldn't see any records that already existed and they couldn't make changes. Or edit, which would allow them to have full functionality with that form. I'm going to leave this blank for now. My window mode, normal, is what you're used to seeing, though it could be hidden. If you have a more advanced application, there may be reasons to do that. I could see just an icon, or a dialog box. That's referred to as a modal form. And what that means is the user can't do anything else until they address that form. If you're going to be using dialog boxes, you want to make sure that that form you're opening has extra buttons on it, like OK and cancel or save, and probably close, so they can get that form out of the way and get back into the meat of the matter. I'll keep this as normal. I can also give my macro a name on the design ribbon here. By choosing macro names, I can give this a name like order form or open order form. The reason why you can give your macro a name is because you can call it by this specific name, and you can have a number of different macros within the same macro group. These items down here are referred to as macro groups, and they may have one or more macros that are held within them. I'm not going to add another macro here for now, so just the macro name is open order form. I need to save this macro group, and I'll save this as open form group, just to be clear. You don't have to add that group to it. I'll choose OK. Now I need to go and tie this to a form that already exists. I'll go ahead and tie this to I'll just tie this to my animal food form. I'll right click here and go into Design View. And when I close my animal food form, I'd like to have that other order form open up. I need to go into the Properties sheet, the properties for the entire form, because I'm going to tie this to the on-close event. I'm on the Event tab in Properties, and I have when the form loads, when it opens, that's the on-load. I could use the on-click event, which would make more sense for a button before inserting of a new record, after I insert a new record, on delete. On got focus means when your cursor enters a field. On lost focus is when your cursor leaves a field. So all of these different items are events to which you can tie one or more macros. On the close event, when I click this pull down menu, it shows me all of my macros that exist. I have my beginning macros where I did not name a macro inside that group. I have my open form group, and then I have specifically my open order form macro within that group. So if I chose open form group instead of that specific macro, it would run every macro that was held within that group. So I have the flexibility here to choose either one, but because I might add more macros to my open form group, right now I'll just select this specific macro name to run. My properties sheet does not need me to click save when I close it. It's going to retain that information. I'll click my X, and now let's test it out. I'll save this. Hey, we're in the form. Hey, record, record, record. Sweet. When I click X, it's going to close it. And here's my macro, opening orders form. Okay. And there it is. It worked. And this is the only form that I have open because I closed my animal food form as well. I can close this form now just for kicks. And we're ready to create a new macro where we add conditions. I'll go back to my Create ribbon, to my macro button. And here I'm going to add my conditions column. On my design ribbon is where I get to choose what I see in my macro grid area. So my condition is going to be based off of a certain field. What's the name of that field? I should actually go back into my animal food form, into Design View, and take a look at what that field's called. It says in stock, but it's actually called quantity in stock. So I'm going to select that, and I'm going to go to Home and choose Copy. I could do Control-C on my keyboard as well. Back into Macro 1, my field is called, Control-V for paste, quantity in stock. When I'm citing a field, I have to have square brackets around that. That is syntax that Access requires in order to understand that I'm talking about a field. When quantity in stock is less than 15, what do I want to do? Well, I want to give a message box, so I'll just press M and then click Message Box. The arguments will be, please order more product, or I guess food would be more human-like. My type here is going to be critical. Oh, it's not really critical, is it? How about warning with an exclamation mark? Oh, and we didn't point out what that title was before. I'll show you this time. With no title, it just says Microsoft Access. It's very generic. Here are my arguments here. Please order more product, period. Yes, I want a beep. It's a warning box. And that is all the information that I had because I didn't have a title there. I think it's easier to use this area, but now that you're getting more comfortable with the arguments, you could type them in there. I do want to do something else though, so I have my condition. My action would be to actually open that form. I'll click O on my keyboard, open form. What form? I'm going to use the food orders again in form view. I'm going to keep this all the same. I'm going to go ahead and click save here. My macro name is going to be open orders again. So use better naming conventions than me, but this is descriptive for what we're doing here. Okay, now we need to tie this back to my animal food order form. I'll close this macro. I'm going to tie it to this field. So to get the property sheet here, I can just double click on the control, and my event is going to be on lost focus, and I already had a macro in here. I'm going to delete that and start from scratch. As soon as my cursor leaves this field, I want to run open orders again macro. See why it's so important to give your macros a descriptive name? Open orders again. All right, I'll choose save. So let's see if this actually works. I'll go back into form view, tab, tab. Oops, it's less than 10. When I lose focus, when I press tab, it's going to say, please order more product. Here's my exclamation mark. Here's my Microsoft Office Access, which is very generic compared to my title bar that should say something like warning or please do something now, danger. I'll choose OK. And now here's my food order form open up. And I'll click X and I'll click X to close that one also. It's kind of a vicious cycle though, because I added a macro. Whenever I close this form, it's going to open the orders form. So now I can click X again. Something that's new to Access 2007 is the ability to build a macro on the fly when you're in a form or a report. I have a report here called food orders. And when it asks for a vendor that we're searching for, like green grass vendor, and if it doesn't have that vendor in the database, it just gives us an empty form. For a user, that could be confusing. They may think, oh, was there an error? Did I type it wrong? What the heck is going on? So let's add a message box when there's no data found. To do so, we're going to go into design view of food orders. I could have just gone into design view when I had it open. And we are going to go into the property sheet, and it's the on no data event. If there's no data, what do we want to happen? We want to build a macro on the fly. So I'll click the build button. Now I have a couple choices. I could build a macro. I could go into my expression builder, which is where we've normally gone when we've clicked that build button, where we see functions, etc. Or I could go into code builder and type in Visual Basic for applications. I'll do macro builder, and here we are in this dialog box, which is getting familiar to you hopefully. The action is going to be a message box, and the message is going to be, there is no vendor by that name, or there are no records to display. Whoops, L-A-Y, period. And the title will be no records were found. Don't you love how I mix my uppercase and lowercase in there? Okay, we'll leave it like that. My type will be question mark. And I'm going to save this, and I can close this macro. We're back in the report, and now we have the onNoData event has an embedded macro tied to it. I'll go ahead and save this, and now in report view, which vendor are you searching for? Green grass, enter. There is no vendor by that name, or there are no records to display. No records were found, and here's what the warning with a question mark looks like. Okay, and now we have that report with absolutely no data whatsoever. It's good programming to have a catch-all type of macro. Like if there's absolutely so many errors, I want my audience to know there's been a fatal error. You have to close this information. I'm sure you have been in a situation before where there was an error and either A, you got a dialog box that said, you know, you can't go any further, you need to make an adjustment, or B, you didn't know what in the world was going on and you wished you would have gotten a dialog box, or you wished there would have been some good coding in the background that closed whatever object it was that you were trying to work with. So we are going to create another new macro, and this new macro is going to have really a message that says there's been a fatal error. So create ribbon macro. My action is just going to be a message box. My argument is going to be a fatal error has occurred. Please close the application. That might be a little bit strong. And grab a cup of coffee! Exclamation mark. My type here is going to be critical, and my title will be critical error, or I could say fatal error. I'm going to save this. I'm going to save this as on error. Okay, and just to run this, I'll show you what it looks like. Critical error. Ooh, an X. That always tells you something bad's happened. A fatal error has occurred. Please close the application and grab a cup of coffee. Hurry! Okay. Now I've created that, but I'd have to tie it with something else. So I can go back into my macros here, and I can tie this to my open form group if I wanted to. I can go into design view. I already have my open error form macro name, and now I can also do my on error name. What is this going to be? Well, I'm going to tie it to the action on error. What happens on error? Well, I want to run the macro that is called on space error. I'll save that, and now when I tie this macro into another object in a form or report, I could tie it as the entire macro group, and if it's not able to open the form, or if there's some problem that occurs, it will go on to the next macro, which is on error, and they'll get that dialog box. There's a fatal error. We can't fix it. You're going to have to close everything and come back into this application fully caffeinated. The show all actions really is just going to show you more information if you have it there. And the single step allows you to just run the next action in a macro. You use single step when you're debugging, because if you have a macro with a number of steps in it and you have an error, you may not be sure where that error occurs. So if you go through the first step and it works, and you go through the second step and it works, and you go through the third step and it doesn't work, you now know that third step is where you need to make that fix, where you need to make that change. So a single step is something that's common in a lot of different coding applications, and maybe you've come across that before. The last type of macro that I'd like to show you is something that allows you to take data from your Access and throw it into a whole nother database or a whole nother file. I'm going to create another macro, and this action is going to be an output action. This is under the O's for output, output 2. The object type is asking me what object do I want to use as the source for my output? A table. What is the name of that table? Memberships. What is the output format? Do I want this to go into Excel 2007, maybe an HTML file, maybe just a text file? So I'll choose Excel 2007. What would I like to name my output file? Memberships spreadsheet, even though spreadsheet is redundant. Do I want to auto start Excel immediately after the output 2 action runs? Yes or no? I'll choose no, since we're just concentrating on Access. Do I have a template file that I'm using? This is handy if you have HTML files and you want to hold that in a specific template, which will give it a good look and feel. Do I want to send this to the printer immediately, or do I want to send it to the application on screen? Well, I could send this to the printer here, and now I have my output 2 macro. I'll click save. My macro name is going to be output, and you won't be able to see my printout, but hopefully you get the idea, which is, oh my gosh, you have tons and tons of actions that you can choose, and the point is that these macros are little mini programs that you can take advantage of to do the work for you. But in order for these macros to work for you, you have to have a master plan. And that may take some time, some evaluation, and it may take having your application rolled out to your users for a while and then having a focus group. Get their feedback. What do they find that they're taking a lot of time doing? When you get that information, you can go back into your application and build some macros that can really alleviate a lot of the job stress or the redundancy that the people who are using your database are going through day to day. I'll go ahead and close this macro and I'll minimize access. We took a look at some simple macros. Again, these are mini programs that can make your job a lot easier. You can add conditions so your macro only runs at certain points in time, and you can tie these macros to events and also to buttons that exist within Access. We took a look at the various events that we have within Access. These are all listed on the property sheet, and depending on the object that you're viewing, there will be different events that will make sense. If you're adding a button, the on-click event makes sense. If you're working with a field, the on-focus, the got focus, the lost focus makes sense. And if you're talking about an overall form or report, on load or on close would make sense for when that macro runs. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.